Hello, I'm James Ezimoha. Welcome to A News. Let's see your headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump extends pause on strikes against Iranian energy plants. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visits Saudi Arabia as Kyiv offers drone defense help in Middle East. And former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro appears in New York court as judge refuses to dismiss criminal charges against him. Thank you for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a pause in attacks on Iran's energy infrastructure on Thursday as diplomatic efforts continue. The move comes amid ongoing negotiations and rising tensions across the region. Here's the latest report.
U.S. President Donald Trump said he is pausing attacks on Iran's energy infrastructure for 10 days, adding that negotiations with Tehran are progressing well. Speaking at a cabinet meeting, Trump said the pause followed what he described as a request from Iran, while noting that discussions remain ongoing. He also pointed to what he called a goodwill gesture, saying Iran allowed 10 oil tankers to transit the Strait of Hormuz during talks.
They said to show you the fact that we're real and solid and we're there, we're going to let you have 8 boats of oil, 8 boats, 8 big boats of oil. This was 2 days ago. And they'll sail up tomorrow. That was 3 days ago. And I didn't think much about it. And then I watched the news, and they said, a very good anchor, actually, happened to be Fox. But I watched it, and he said, something's unusual happening. There are 8 boats that are going right up the middle of the Hormuz Strait. 8 big tankers are going loaded up with oil right through. And I said, well, I guess they were right, and they were real. And I think they were Pakistani flagged. Yes. And I said, well, I guess we're dealing with the right people. And actually, they then apologized for something they said, and they said, we're going to send 2 more boats.
Trump said the development indicated a level of engagement between the two sides, while warning that Tehran must reach an agreement or face continued pressure. Meanwhile, Iran has submitted its formal response to a U.S. proposed 15-point ceasefire plan through intermediaries and is awaiting Washington's reply, according to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency. The response was delivered via mediating countries as indirect contacts between the two sides continue, including message exchanges facilitated by Pakistan. Trump has also warned that Iran must get serious in negotiations after Tehran rejected an earlier version of the proposal. Despite the diplomatic exchanges, hostilities have continued across the region. Air raid sirens sounded across Tel Aviv early Friday, as Israeli authorities warned of incoming threats following multiple waves of Iranian missile strikes targeting cities including Tel Aviv and Haifa.
Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says the Strait of Hormuz is closed and warned that any ships attempting to pass through could face harsh measures. This is according to Iranian media. State media also reported that shipping linked to what it described as allies and supporters of the United States and Israel is prohibited. Separately, media reports say 3 container ships of different nationalities were turned back after warnings from the IRGC Navy. U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized NATO during a cabinet meeting, questioning the alliance's support for Washington's war efforts in the Middle East. He also criticized the members for failing to meet defense spending commitments.
Thank you to the incredible members of my cabinet. They're doing a phenomenal job. One thing, we're very disappointed, I'll say it publicly, we're very disappointed with NATO because NATO has done absolutely nothing. And I've always said, 25 years ago, I mean, I was somebody that wasn't a politician, but I was always involved in politics and I understood politics. I said 25 years ago that NATO's a paper tiger, but more importantly, that we'll come to their rescue, but they will never come to ours. And I want you to remember that we said this. They didn't come to our rescue. Now they all want to help. When they're annihilated, the other side is annihilated, they said, we'd love to send ships. They actually made a statement, a couple of them, that we want to get involved when the war's over. No, it's supposed to get involved when the war's beginning, or even before it begins, including us, you know.
Cross-border strikes between Israel and Hezbollah are intensifying, with Israel moving towards creating a buffer zone inside southern Lebanon. Here's more on the story.
Tensions are escalating along the Israel-Lebanon border. Missiles were fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel just after midnight on Friday, with Israeli defense systems intercepting several. Authorities report no casualties from the latest barrage. In Beirut's southern suburbs, an airstrike involving 3 missiles struck a building overnight, with explosions heard and smoke rising across the area. Meanwhile, in southern Lebanon, the Israeli military says 2 soldiers were killed during clashes with Hezbollah forces along the border. Israel has announced plans to establish a buffer zone south of the Litani River, aiming to push Hezbollah further from its border. Troops have moved into the area, building fortifications and demolishing homes in evacuated villages. Defense Minister Israel Katz says the military will maintain control of key crossings and the security zone as long as threats persist. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describes the operation as an expansion of an existing security strip to protect northern communities. Hezbollah has warned it will resist any long-term presence, calling the plan an existential threat to Lebanon.
Ukraine is stepping up its outreach to the Middle East as President Volodymyr Zelensky visits Saudi Arabia for talks on security cooperation. Zelensky says important meetings are planned as Kyiv seeks closer ties with regional partners. Ukraine is offering air defense and battle-tested drone interceptor technology known for being low-cost and effective, while seeking financial and technological support in return. Ukrainian expert teams are already working with partners in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. The visit comes as Ukraine faces a potential new Russian offensive amid stalled peace talks. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development are warning of a sharp slowdown as households and businesses in the United Kingdom face increasing strain. This follows rising energy prices and global trade disruptions. Our correspondent Zainab Faridzada has more.
The UK economy is expected to be among the hardest hit by the ongoing Middle East conflict, according to new analysis by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It warns that rising energy prices and disruption to global trade are already pushing inflation higher and a slowing growth following the war in Iran. Britain is seen as particularly vulnerable because of its reliance on imported fuel and international markets. The OECD says the UK is likely to face a sharp economic slowdown than other major economies, with weaker business investment and a fragile jobs market already adding pressure before the conflict escalated. Across Europe, countries such as France, Germany, and Italy are expected to see a more limited impact, as they are less exposed to rising energy costs. The organization warns that the longer the conflict continues, the greater the risk to economic stability, with higher energy prices pushing up costs for businesses and households. Oil prices have surged, rising from around $60 a barrel in January to close to $100. The spike has been driven in part by disruption to the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping route for a fifth of the world's oil supply. The OECD says the American economy is likely to grow faster than expected, supported by stronger demand for U.S. oil and lower import tariffs. Also, the U.S. economy is expected to remain relatively resilient. Rising fuel costs are set to hit household incomes and business profits, a pattern also seen in countries including the UK, Turkey, Brazil, and Mexico. In Westminster, the government says it is working to strengthen the economy and protect households, but with no clear end to the conflict, analysts warn the risk remain firmly to the downside. The OECD has downgraded UK growth to just 0.7% this year, down from previous forecasts compared with 1.3% growth last year. Jennifer is at A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
France has responded to criticisms over its decision to exclude South Africa from the upcoming G7 summit. Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said Paris acted on its own, dismissing suggestions of external influence. The move comes after reports that Washington opposed South Africa's participation.
We have always relied on South Africa and we respect the important role it plays in international affairs. As far as the G7 is concerned, we chose to invite Kenya to Evian in recognition of the work we are doing together to prepare the Africa Forward Summit, the Africa-France Summit that will take place on May 11th and 12th in Nairobi. We did not give in to any pressure. Rather, we made a choice consistent with our decision to keep the G7 streamlined and focused on geo-economic issues. We naturally remain in close contact with South Africa, which continues to be an essential partner of France on all major global issues.
US President Donald Trump has ordered the government to pay Transportation Security Administration workers. This comes as staffing shortages and rising absences disrupt airport operations across the United States.
Well, I'm going to look at it.
US President Donald Trump has ordered the Homeland Security Department to immediately pay around 50,000 Transportation Security Administration workers as staffing shortages disrupt travel across US airports during the partial government shutdown. The action follows a breakdown in Congress over funding for the Department of Homeland Security, with disagreements over immigration enforcement rules delaying a deal and forcing TSA officers to work without pay. More than 11% of TSA staff failed to report for duty nationwide, with significantly higher absentee rates of 30% or more recorded at major hubs, including New York's JFK, Houston, Atlanta, Baltimore, and New Orleans, triggering long delays at security checkpoints. Nearly 500 officers have quit since February as unpaid work conditions strain the workforce and raise concerns that smaller airports could face partial closures if staffing levels worsen. The disruption is unfolding during a spring break travel surge, with passenger volumes running about 5% higher than last year, leading to hours-long waits at some screening points. The TSA has warned it may be forced to shut down operations at smaller airports if the staffing situation deteriorates further. To ease the pressure, hundreds of immigration agents and Homeland Security investigations officers have been deployed to 14 airports, assisting with ID checks, guarding entrances and exits, handling logistics, and managing crowds, while those personnel continue to receive pay during the shutdown. It remains unclear how long the emergency funding for TSA workers can be sustained, or whether existing Homeland Security funds are being redirected to cover the payments.
A federal judge in New York has said he will not dismiss criminal charges against Venezuela's former president, Nicolás Maduro, over a dispute about legal fees. Here's more on the story.
A court hearing on Venezuela's former president, Nicolás Maduro, has taken place in New York. During the one-hour hearing, the US federal judge Alvin Hellerstein said the case against Nicolás Maduro will proceed, rejecting defense arguments that US sanctions are blocking his choice of legal representation. The dispute centers on whether Venezuelan state funds can be used for his defense, with his lawyers saying he lacks the means to pay, while prosecutors argue the restrictions are justified under sanctions and national security concerns. Hellerstein also questioned whether alternative funding options exist and said he will issue a separate ruling on the matter. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, have pleaded not guilty to drug trafficking and related charges and remain in custody awaiting trial. In court, Maduro followed proceedings through a translator, took notes, and appeared calmer than at earlier hearings. His lawyer also dismissed reports that Maduro has claimed he was kidnapped, saying such accounts should not be relied upon. Meanwhile, supporters gathered in Caracas calling for his release, as Donald Trump said additional cases could be brought against him. The case is set to continue, with a key ruling on the funding dispute expected in the coming weeks.
Mexico's Navy reports that 2 humanitarian aid boats are missing after setting out for Cuba. The vessels never arrived in Havana as planned and have not been heard from since departing, according to officials. They were carrying humanitarian supplies as part of a grassroots aid convoy. Authorities have launched a search and rescue operation with international partners joining efforts to locate the missing boats in the Caribbean. Student protests have erupted in Santiago, Chile, over proposed changes to education policy, including to limit access to free higher education, scrap scholarship programs, and tighten control over state-backed student loans. The police were deployed in large numbers, using water cannons to disperse demonstrators who gathered near the former National Congress, while some protesters threw objects at security vehicles. No arrests were reported by Thursday evening. The protest was organized by major student groups, including the Confederation of Students of Chile and the Assembly of Secondary Students. After the break, we'll discuss whether President Donald Trump's Iran war pause signals real peace talks or a temporary shift in strategy. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back to A News. The United States has paused attacks on Iran's energy infrastructure, with officials saying negotiations are progressing. But with fighting still ongoing, questions remain over whether diplomacy can truly take hold. Joining us to discuss this is Anna Evans, political analyst from Lisbon, Portugal. Good to have you, Anna. Now, President Trump has
Good
paused...
to see you, James.
Thank you. President Trump has paused strikes on Iran's energy grid until April 6th. Yet the IDF continues to eliminate high-ranking Iranian officers like Admiral Tangsiri. How do you explain this good cop, bad cop strategy between Washington and Tel Aviv?
Well, this is a classical strategy that allows the two parties against Iran to coordinate and optimize results in terms of the goals that both Washington and Israel want. However, it's not just a good cop, bad cop strategy. It is that, but it is beyond that. Again, a signal that Washington's goals are not necessarily all identical to Israel's goals, because for Israel, the decapitation of all the military structure of the regime is essential. It is vital for Israel. Dismantling Iran's foreign military capacity is an existential issue. Whereas for Washington, of course, eliminating or dismantling Iran's foreign military capacity and also helping to disentangle the Revolutionary Guard's domestic capacity to tame dissent, those are important goals, but they are not existential. And so, the two parties, Washington and Israel, can afford to keep coordinating on a different branch strategy and try and optimize negotiation results with the other party, which is Iran.
Now, speaking about this dual goal, as you mentioned, regarding the US and Israel, do you think it serves both nations in the long run, particularly about the objectives in the Middle East?
Well, the regional stability in the Middle East is a very important goal for both Israel and the US administration. Iran has been promoting proxies over the region for decades, and these proxies have destabilized many countries, not just Israel, but Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. All the Arab countries are afraid of, resurgence of fundamentalisms that have been sponsored for quite a great time by Iran. And so the stability of the region is, without any doubt, very important for both Israel and the US and for the world in general. A more stable Middle East means, much better energy flows, much more economic prosperity in the region, and it will obviously also translate, like a domino effect outwards the region. And so it would be, the dismantling Iran's capacity to destabilize the region is in economic terms, as well as political and societal terms, a point of integration and prosperity that would be of interest to all of us, not just, Washington and Israel, but generally.
Thank you. Now, Iran has reportedly begun charging transit fee in Chinese yuan for vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. In your view, is this a desperate move for liquidity under fire, or a calculated attempt to pull Beijing directly into the conflict's resolution?
James, it certainly is, without any doubt, a mechanism to provide liquidity. And, obviously, Iran cannot use petrodollars. It is subject to comprehensive and long-lasting sanctions. And, it's using the Chinese currency allows Iran to not only get the liquidity it needs in selling its energy, but also in demonstrating to the West and to Washington in particular that the dollar is not the only currency in foreign trade. And if we think this is a long-standing claim by the BRICS, and as we know, in the BRICS countries, Russia, Brazil, China, and other countries are the non-aligned countries vis-à-vis the US, and these countries have been, proposing and trying to bring up an alternative currency internationally. So in doing this, Iran is getting liquidity, but at the same time it is emphasizing, an alternative to the petrodollar, which obviously China would also like to have in place, and Russia as well.
Now, we just got reports that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claims the Strait of Hormuz is closed. What actions could be implied by its warning of harsh measures against ships, particularly those aligned with the US?
Well, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has been a strategic leverage for Iran for a long time. It's Iran's pearl. Iran has always threatened to shut down the strait because Iran knows that this is, the ultimate leverage it has over the global economy. We all know how much the global economy is dependent, a large percentage of gas that is traded around the world, and at more than 20% of oil traded around the world, they used to pass through the Hormuz Strait. And so closure here is really, an impactful measure. And in this sense, yes, it is a desperate measure by Iran. It is the last resort. Now, obviously, Iran also has a lot to lose in using this strategy, and this represents an escalation of the conflict. In reality, we know that over the past days, very little trade went through, and Iran was blackmailing trade using, the strait. But total closure is the ultimate blackmail with regard to the global economy. The markets shoot, in diverse directions. Investment halts. All the energy trade will have to be even more intensely diverted, in order to cope with this. Now, the great problem for Iran is that the US has already sent a lot of troops to the Middle East, reinforcing the troops it already has there. And one of the options that the US would have would be to land on, for example, Karg Island, or, really use islands that Iran holds as, as a strategy for domination of the region. And so we would go to a new stage of the war that Washington has been wanting to avoid, and the Arab Gulf countries also have tried to avoid by not defending from the attacks.
Now, you just mentioned the Gulf countries. How much longer can they maintain their neutral stance before they are forced to choose a side?
Well, their neutral stance is part of a very coordinated and intense diplomacy, not to escalate the war to a full regional war, which nobody wants, neither the Arab states, nor Iran, nor Israel. Nobody here wants, and obviously not Washington, nobody wants a full-scale regional war here. And so, you know, the Arab Gulf countries and Washington have been intensely coordinating to make sure that that they don't escalate. So not acting proactively in war initiatives is a mechanism to maintain the war not at a full-fledged and full-blown regional war. And this is what the Arab Gulf states have been doing. I believe, as an analyst, that it is of interest of the Arab Gulf states to remain in this position because they really do not want to escalate fully. Having said that, it is also certain that the Arab Gulf states are providing intelligence, defense systems, and, you know, cooperating with the US and Israel, not to allow the attacks by Iran to be even more drastic in terms of civilian losses than they have already been. So there is an implicit coordination, a silent coordination without proactive war.
Now, finally, Anna, Western intelligence reports suggest Russia is finalizing a massive shipment of drones and supplies to Tehran. Is Russia intentionally fueling this war just to exhaust the US and leave the European borders vulnerable?
Well, James, it looks like that. In fact, Russia is the party that has won the most so far from this war. Russia has diverted the attention of international partners who were on the side of Ukraine towards the Middle East, and it has opened a war front in the US. And the more the US is distracted with the second front, the less the US has time and energy and military capacity to concentrate on Ukraine. And, we know that the administration statements have been very clear that Ukraine is not the US war. And so Russia, the more this conflict lasts, the better it will be for Russia. So Russia is indeed keeping the US distracted and possible Western allies distracted with a second front, and therefore, with more limited capacity towards assisting Ukraine. And so yes, it is a very clear maneuver to maximize Russia's own standing vis-à-vis Ukraine.
Anna, thank you very much for sharing your time and insights with us.
Thank you, a pleasure.
That was Anna Evans, political analyst from Lisbon, Portugal. After the break, we'll take a look at key stories shaping the region. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back to A News. Iran has rejected U.S. calls for negotiations, warning that continued strikes are deepening regional instability and undermining diplomatic efforts. Turaj Shirlilu has more from Tehran.
I'm reporting from Enqilab Square in Iran's capital, Tehran. As the war became 4 weeks old, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's offer for negotiations in the middle of conflict, branding it a sign of contradiction in Washington's words and actions. He made this statement in a phone contact with his Turkish counterpart, Hakan Fidan, during which he called on regional countries and international community to condemn the Israel-U.S. invasion of Iran. In a separate contact with Kazakh Foreign Minister Yermak Kosherbayev, Tehran's top diplomat said that air raids on Iranian northern port city of Bandar Anzali have seriously jeopardized the security and stability in the Caspian Sea basin. According to official news media, quoting foreign ministry statements, Araghchi also in a phone conversation with Brazilian Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira urged countries of the region to prevent the United States and Israel from using their territory and facility to commit acts of aggression against Iran. Meantime, UN Security Council holds a meeting behind closed doors on Friday, New York local time, to discuss the US and Israeli attacks on Iran's civilian infrastructure, including the US bombing of a girls' primary school in southern city of Minab on the first day of war on 28th of February. The in-camera session convenes at the proposal of Russia with participation of 15 permanent and non-permanent members of the Council, while the war entered its 28th day. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting from Tehran, Foreign News.
Humanitarian aid is continuing to move through Iran, through Azerbaijan's southern border, with both rail and road deliveries passing through Astara as regional tensions remain high. Leila Rahimli has more.
Well, we are here in Astara, right on Azerbaijan's southern border at the crossing point with Iran. The freight train from Russia carrying more than 300 tons of humanitarian aid has already passed through here and crossed into Iran. And what we are seeing now is a separate flow, trucks continuing to move aid across the border. Most of it's medical, medicines, hospital supplies, even field kits, that kind of support that can be used immediately. And this isn't the first shipment. Earlier in March, a much smaller delivery around 13 tons was sent along the same route. So the aid is coming in different ways, by rail and by road, and moving into Iran through this crossing point. And it also highlights Azerbaijan's role here as a key transit point for humanitarian deliveries.
Today, in accordance with the instructions of the President of the Russian Federation and on the instructions of the Minister of Emergency Situations, the second stage of the delivery of emergency humanitarian aid to the people of Iran was completed. This aid included 300 tons of various medications. As you know, another delivery was previously made by air to Lankaran airfield, subsequently transported to Iran. In total, the delivery of the cargo took almost 4 days, and this was made possible thanks to the efforts of various agencies in Russia and Azerbaijan. In this regard, I would like to thank all employees of the Russian ministries and agencies, as well as our Azerbaijani colleagues who facilitated the speedy delivery of this humanitarian aid.
All of this being coordinated at the state level, involving Russia, Azerbaijan and Iran. And this comes amid ongoing military escalation in the region. At the end of February, the US and Israel launched a joint operation targeting Iran. Since then, there have been retaliatory strikes, regional spillover, and rising tensions across the Middle East. So that's all for now. This is Leila Rahimli in Astara with Javid Aliyev behind the camera for A News.
Uzbekistan is advancing both energy security and environmental sustainability with new oil and gas projects on the Usyurt Plateau alongside expanded greening efforts under the Yashil Makan program.
Uzbekistan is strengthening its energy sector through new international partnerships, as British company BP joins efforts to develop hydrocarbon resources on the Ustyurt Plateau. According to Uzbekneftgaz, work is underway to maximize output at existing fields while accelerating geological exploration. The government has also engaged major international firms such as Boston Consulting Group and Schlumberger to introduce advanced technologies into the sector. Projects on the Ustyurt Plateau are being implemented in cooperation with Azerbaijan's SOCAR and could attract up to $2 billion in investment. The site is estimated to hold up to 100 million tons of oil and 35 billion cubic meters of natural gas, with annual production expected to reach 5 million tons of oil. First extraction is projected within the next 3 to 5 years as infrastructure development continues. At the same time, Uzbekistan is scaling up its environmental agenda under the nationwide Yashil Makon program. A new presidential decree sets a target to increase green coverage from 14.2 to 30% by 2030, while expanding green space per capita to 10 square meters. Air pollution levels including PM2.5 and PM10 particles are expected to decrease by 20 to 25%. And temperature in climate-affected regions could drop by up to 2 degrees Celsius. By 2028, at least 100 hectares of botanical and dendrological gardens will be created across the country. In addition, new mechanisms such as a green ticket system will allow individuals and businesses to offset carbon emissions, with strengths directed toward tree planting and maintenance. Officials claim the combined approach reflects broader strategy, expanding energy production to support economic growth, while simultaneously investing in environmental measures to mitigate its long-term impact. It is Cyril Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Georgia Prime Minister Irakli Kopakidze says the country will not impose sanctions on Russia, but insists it will also not allow them to be bypassed through its region. His comments come as tensions with the European Union continue over Tbilisi's stance on sanctions. Our Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kopakidze says the government is following a clear and principled policy on Russia-related sanctions, refusing to impose them but also not allowing them to be bypassed through Georgian territory. He emphasized that this approach is guided by national interests, noting that imposing sanctions could have significant economic consequences for Georgian citizens, including farmers and exporters. At the same time, he stressed that authorities strictly monitor trade and logistics to prevent any violations of international restrictions. His remarks come against the backdrop of growing tension with the European Union, which has adopted multiple rounds of sanctions against Russia since the start of the war in Ukraine. The issue gained renewed attention in recent weeks as the European Union prepared its 20th sanctions package. For the first time, the proposal included measures targeting infrastructure in third countries, among them Georgia's Black Sea Olavi oil terminal. The draft would have restricted EU companies and individuals from engaging in transactions with the port amid concerns over potential links to Russian oil transport. Georgian authorities strongly rejected these concerns. Kopakidze stated that allegations of sanctions circumvention are unfounded and that Georgia has acted responsibly throughout the process. He added that the government provided assurances to European partners that sanctioned vessels would not be serviced in Georgian ports. Kopakidze has criticized what he describes as double standards from European institutions, arguing that while Georgia faces pressure to impose sanctions, trade between EU countries and Russia continues at significant levels. Following those developments and consultations, the European Union ultimately did not include the Olavi oil terminal in the final version of the 20th sanctions package. However, monitoring of compliance is expected to continue. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Tensions are rising again along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border as Islamabad resumes military operations. Meanwhile, the United Nations warns of mounting civilian casualties. They have urged both sides to return to a ceasefire. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Tahir Andarabi confirmed during a weekly press briefing that the pause in military operation has ended, describing the move as a targeted campaign against what he called terrorist hideouts inside Afghanistan. The operation had briefly stopped during Eid following requests from what Pakistan described as brotherly countries. But authorities now say it will continue. Meanwhile, UN experts are urging both Afghanistan and Pakistan to declare a new ceasefire and work toward a peace agreement. According to the UN, since February 26, at least 289 civilians have been killed or injured, and more than 115,000 people have been displaced by the fighting. They also expressed concern over damage to civilian infrastructure, school closures, disruptions at crossings along the Durand Line, and the suspension of trade. The UN further condemned a Pakistani airstrike on March 16 that reportedly hit a drug rehabilitation center, causing casualties among hundreds of people. This comes after Afghan spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid responded to calls from religious scholars in both countries to extend the ceasefire until Eid al-Adha, saying Afghanistan did not initiate the conflict. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A News.
All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.